Someone threw him into that well like he was trash. I froze when I heard the whimpering. Weak, desperate cries came from a dark, 12-foot hole behind the barn. A 4-month-old German Shepherd puppy, left to die alone in the mud. No way out. No one coming. It was just past noon in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Sunlight hit the old boards of the barn behind my grandfather's abandoned property. I was there to check the fencing before the county tore it all down. I wasn't supposed to hear anything, but I did. A sound so small, so broken, it didn't seem real at first. Then I heard it again. A high, trembling whine cut through the quiet like a blade. I stepped around a collapsed fence panel, following the sound until I saw the well. It wasn't even covered, just a rusted rim of metal with rotted boards leaning against the side. My heart punched my ribs when I leaned over and saw him. At the very bottom, barely visible in the dappled light, lay a German Shepherd puppy. His fur was caked in wet dirt, one paw curled unnaturally under his chest, and his ribs moved just enough to prove he was still breathing. His eyes met mine, wide, terrified, but silent. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He was waiting. I dropped to my knees. "Hey, hey, little guy," I whispered. "You're okay. I see you." But even my voice sounded wrong, too loud, too late. The dirt around the top of the well was disturbed. My eyes followed it, a trail like someone had dragged something, or someone. That's when I saw the rope, a torn length of cheap nylon dangling over the edge. It had been cut, not broken, cut. Whoever did this meant for him to stay down there. My name's David. I've seen a lot of things. I used to be a firefighter. I've pulled people out of wrecks and floodwater. But nothing prepared me for the way this puppy looked at me, like he'd already accepted that no one was coming, like he'd already said goodbye. I reached for my phone. No signal. The barn sat too far from the main road, and the radio in my truck was dead. I couldn't call for help. I couldn't leave him. He wouldn't survive another hour in that pit. The sun shifted, throwing his tiny form into shadow again. I felt my chest tighten. "You're not dying in that hole," I said. "Not today." I looked around for anything I could use. A board, a rope, a miracle. There was nothing. Just me, the wind, and him. The German Shepherd puppy stayed still, barely moving except to blink. And that look in his eyes, it wasn't fear. It was surrender. Why would someone do this to a puppy? Why would they put him there and walk away? And how long had he been waiting in the dark for someone like me? I lay flat on my stomach and reached as far down the well as I could, my fingers stretching into nothing but cold air. There was no way. He was too far. The well was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, but at least 12 feet deep, too deep for a puppy to fall without breaking something, too deep to survive without help. Yet somehow he had. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper again, just stared up at me like he didn't know whether I was real or just another shadow at the edge of his life. His chest rose and fell in short, shallow gasps. His fur clung to him in heavy, wet patches. His tail didn't move. I scanned the area, heart pounding. There was a broken ladder in the barn, but it was rusted through, snapped in the middle like a toothpick. No rope, no cell service. I checked the truck again, even climbed on top, hoping for a single bar of signal. Nothing. Just wind and sun and silence. The silence was worse than the crying. It meant he was fading. I ran back to the well and looked again. The German Shepherd puppy had moved just slightly, now sitting on his haunches, trembling. His ears flicked at the sound of my boots crunching dirt. He still believed someone might help. I started shouting, "Hello, anyone nearby?" My voice echoed across the open field, bounced off trees and fencing, and came back empty. I didn't know what to do. I stood over the edge, fists clenched. If I tried to climb down and fell, I might crush him. If I waited for help, he might not make it. My thoughts were spiraling. Then something caught my eye. Just near the edge of the well, half buried in the grass, was a piece of red fabric. I pulled it free, a tattered bandana, puppy-sized, cheap and faded. Someone had tied it around his neck at some point, but it had been ripped off. There was dried mud on the knot. Whoever left him had taken it off, like they didn't even want him to have a name. My throat tightened. I looked down at him again. "Baxter," I whispered. I don't know why that name came out, but it felt right. He blinked slowly, his little head tilting. I swear he heard it. I said it again, louder. "Baxter, you hold on for me, okay?" He didn't move, but he didn't look away. I couldn't just stand there. I grabbed a crowbar from the truck and started prying loose the broken boards from the barn wall. If I could lower them into the well, maybe he could climb. But I knew the truth. He was too weak. He hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk water. His paws were raw from scraping the stone. He'd been trying to get out. There were claw marks all around the bottom, dozens of them, some bleeding faintly onto the walls. He'd tried until he couldn't try anymore. And still he sat there, watching, hoping. A 4-month-old German Shepherd puppy, trapped in a dark, narrow hole behind a forgotten barn, left like garbage, left to die. What kind of person does that? And how do you save someone who's already been given up on? I knelt by the edge again, peering into the darkness, trying to will my mind to find a solution. Baxter hadn't moved. His chest still rose, but slower now. His little body slumped sideways, like he was too tired to hold his head up. The light barely touched him now, just a faint line across his back, like a spotlight fading at the end of a show. The claw marks, there were so many, deep grooves cut into the moss-covered walls at every angle. His nails had worn down to nubs trying to climb out. I imagined him slipping, falling back down over and over, his heart pounding, lungs desperate for breath, no water, no food, no hope. And someone did this. That was the part that made my skin crawl. He hadn't fallen. He'd been put here, lowered or dropped, left in a place no one was meant to survive. And the only reason I'd even come was because of an old fence post I was supposed to pull before the county arrived. Baxter didn't cry anymore. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he thought crying had brought pain last time. I called out to him softly again. "Baxter, can you hear me, buddy?" His ears twitched, then stilled. I sprinted to my truck and floored it toward the back road. My friend Paul lived about 5 minutes away, just past the tree line. We hadn't spoken much lately, but he used to be a rescue tech in the fire department, the guy who always kept his ropes, harnesses, and gear in the shed long after retirement. I pulled up fast, dust flying, and leapt out before the engine fully stopped. Paul was in his yard, trimming branches with a hatchet in hand. I didn't waste time. Puppy in a well. No way out. "I need your rope." He blinked once, dropped the hatchet, and jogged behind me to the truck. That's what I always admired about Paul. He didn't ask questions when lives were at stake. By the time we got back to the barn, my throat was dry from panic. I was terrified I'd be too late. I rushed to the edge, heart hammering. He was still there, still breathing, still waiting. Paul came up behind me and exhaled. A man, how deep is that? 12 feet. Maybe more. We opened the truck bed and uncoiled an old rescue rope. Paul tested the weight rating, checked the friction knots, and tied off a sling. "We can't fit a person down there," he muttered. "But we can make a loop, try to cradle him." "If he slips out, he won't." I looked down again. Baxter had shifted a little. He saw us now, both of us. And he didn't hide. He didn't tremble. He just blinked. That was all the strength he had left. I called to him again, gently. "Baxter, hang in there, bud. We are coming." And he moved, just a fraction, enough to show he heard, enough to prove that even after everything, this German Shepherd puppy was still trying, still fighting, still believing someone might come. Paul fed the rope down slowly, hands steady, eyes narrowed. The looped sling swayed slightly as it descended, brushing the narrow walls. The light shifted as clouds moved overhead, casting long shadows across the opening. I dropped to my knees, guiding the rope as best I could while watching Baxter below. He didn't panic. He didn't try to run. He just lay there, his chest barely rising, eyes following the rope like it was something he half remembered from another life. I kept my voice low, calm, steady, the same tone I used back when I had to talk people through house fires, back when I wore the badge. "You're okay, Baxter. You're not alone anymore. We are going to get you out." Paul anchored the rope to the rear axle of my truck and checked the tension. "If you can get that loop under him, we might have a shot," he said. "But he's got to stay still." "He will." I laid flat again and reached in as far as I could, using a crowbar to guide the loop. It took longer than I thought, 20 minutes of adjustments, of shifting angles, of me talking to a silent, mud-covered puppy who never looked away from my face. When the loop finally slid around his chest and belly, I felt a breath catch in my throat. That's it, Baxter. That's perfect. Just stay still, okay? He didn't resist, didn't struggle. I swear he understood. Paul began pulling slowly, hand over hand. The rope creaked under the weight. I watched every inch, terrified the loop would slip or Baxter would squirm or something would go wrong we hadn't thought of. 6 feet up, he was dangling now, swinging slightly. His front paws dangled limp, but his eyes locked on mine. 8 feet. The walls narrowed. He bumped the side, let out the faintest whimper. I felt it like a knife in my ribs. 9 feet. The rope caught slightly. We both froze. I gripped the edge, praying, willing him to hold on. Paul adjusted the angle. Little more. Little more. 10 feet. I could see his full body now, covered in mud, soaked, bones too visible. A 4-month-old German Shepherd puppy who had no business still being alive, but somehow was. And then his nose broke the sunlight. I reached down and pulled with both arms, cradling his weight as Paul loosened the rope. Baxter didn't make a sound. I laid him gently on the ground. His body was shaking from exhaustion, but he turned his head, pressing it into my chest, right over my heartbeat. That's when I lost it. My hands were covered in dirt and tears and fur. I held him like he was mine, like I'd always known him, like I was the one who'd been trapped all this time. Paul stood a few feet away, silent. Then he said, "You got him out, but I think he got you, too." I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I knew was that this wasn't the end. This was just the start. Baxter was so light in my arms, it scared me. German Shepherd puppies at 4 months should be solid, strong, already showing the boldness of the breed. But he felt like nothing, like a bundle of soaked towels wrapped around fragile bone. His fur was slick with mud. His legs hung loose, and I could feel every rib press against my chest with each shallow breath. Paul opened the truck door, laying an old wool blanket across the passenger seat. "Get in. I'll drive." I didn't argue. I cradled Baxter gently as I slid into the cab, holding him tight against me. The moment the door shut, he whimpered, the softest sound, not from fear, from pain. I whispered, "It's okay, buddy. We are going. I've got you now." We drove fast. The nearest clinic that took emergencies was 25 minutes out of Tulsa, down 2-lane roads with dips and potholes that rattled every bone in my spine. Baxter didn't move the whole ride, just trembled against me, his breath fogging the glass. I couldn't stop looking at him. His eyes weren't empty. They were aware, quiet, but not gone, like he was still trying to understand what had just happened, like he didn't believe this rescue was real yet. Paul glanced over. What kind of monster does that? Drops a puppy in a hole and leaves him to starve. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice. My jaw was clenched too tight. When we pulled into the vet's lot, I jumped out before the truck fully stopped. The front desk girl spotted us coming and rushed to the door. "No appointment," I said. "But he needs help now." They didn't waste time. 2 vets met us with a towel and stretcher. I didn't want to let go of him, but I did, gently, like handing over something sacred. In the fluorescent light, his condition was even worse than I'd seen. Fleas crawled through his fur. His paw pads were cracked and bloody. The whites of his eyes were yellowed from dehydration. And yet, when the vet touched his head, he didn't flinch. He just looked up. "This one's a fighter," she murmured. "He shouldn't be alive, but he is." I stood there, frozen, watching them work, for lines, fluids, thermal wraps, a warm towel, everything happening so fast, but my mind stuck on that moment, his head pressed to my chest. I stepped outside and sat on the curb, elbows on my knees. Paul handed me a bottle of water. "You okay?" "I don't know." I looked back at the glass doors. Through them, I could still see the table where Baxter lay, the table where he was finally safe. "How long do you think he was down there?" Paul asked. I shook my head. "Long enough to give up." Then I paused, but not long enough to stop hoping. And that's the part one couldn't let go of, that after everything, this tiny, broken German Shepherd puppy still looked up when I called his name. They let me stay with him that night. The clinic had a quiet room in the back, a recovery space usually meant for post-surgery observation, and the vet offered it to me without asking questions. Maybe she saw the way I looked at Baxter. Maybe she knew I wasn't going to leave him alone again. He lay on a soft pad, wrapped in clean towels, a heating mat under his body. One foreline dripped fluids into his forehead. The other carried antibiotics. His breathing was steadier now, deeper, no longer panicked. But his eyes stayed open, watching everything, like sleep was a risk he couldn't afford. I sat beside him on the floor, back against the wall, watching the monitor pulse and sync with his fragile heart. He didn't make a sound, just looked at me, sometimes blinking, sometimes not. Around 2 a.m., I leaned forward and gently placed my hand beside his paw. After a few seconds, he shifted just slightly and let his paw rest on top of mine. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't just surviving, he was choosing. It reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years. When I was 11, my dad brought home a German Shepherd pup from the county shelter. Her name was Maddie. I used to lie on the floor with her during thunderstorms, her body pressed into mine, her nose tucked under my arm. I hadn't remembered that in decades. Not until now. Baxter blinked again, slow and calm, not afraid, not anymore. At sunrise, the vet came in and quietly checked his vitals. She smiled when she saw his paw resting on mine. "He's stable," she whispered. "We'll know more after some blood work, but he's strong." Strong. That word stuck with me because strength wasn't supposed to look like this. Ribs showing, body limp, eyes sunken. But here he was, still alive, still present, still trying. By mid-morning, he'd managed to eat a few bites of soft food, just a little, enough to give his body something to work with. He didn't lift his head yet, but when I spoke, his ears twitched toward my voice. One of the techs brought in a small, tagless collar and laid it on the table. "We keep extras," she said. "If he stays with you, he'll need one." I nodded but didn't answer. Not yet. Not until I was sure. Not until he told me. I stayed with him the rest of the day, taking short breaks only when the staff made me. They brought me coffee, a sandwich, and a clean towel to wipe the dirt off my arms. Every time I returned to the room, Baxter looked up, not for food, not out of fear, just to check if I was still there. And every time, I was, because this German Shepherd puppy had waited long enough for someone not to leave. The second night, he finally fell asleep. It wasn't deep or peaceful. His body still twitched now and then, tiny spasms in his legs, like he was running from something in his dreams, but he slept. And that in itself felt like a small miracle. I stayed in the same spot, same folded blanket beneath me, back against the same wall. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to miss a moment. Around midnight, a thunderstorm rolled in. The power flickered once, then steadied. Rain tapped against the windows, and thunder growled far off in the distance. I tensed instinctively, watching Baxter. His ears twitched, then pinned back. His breathing picked up, shallow and fast. His paws shifted, but he didn't wake. I slid my hand closer, just like before. His paw found mine again, and even though his eyes stayed closed, I could feel the muscles in his little body begin to relax. It hit me then. He was learning to trust in pieces, not all at once, not in some magical moment, but slowly, hour by hour, breath by breath. By morning, his appetite had grown. He drank water on his own. He even licked peanut butter from my fingertips, one small lick at a time. The vet smiled when she saw that. "He's coming back," she said. And I believed her. That afternoon, we moved him to a larger room with soft flooring and low lighting. They set up a recovery pen, a warm bed, and toys he didn't yet know how to play with. I brought him a stuffed bear I'd picked up from the clinic's donation box. He sniffed it, nudged it, then laid his chin on top of it and stared at me. The name tag on the collar still sat unused on the counter. Baxter, etched in black over brushed metal. One of the techs asked if I wanted to fill out the paperwork, the kind that made things official. I told her I wasn't sure yet, not because I didn't want him, but because I didn't want to assume anything he hadn't chosen. That evening, after another slow meal and a fresh feline, I carried him outside for the first time, just for a moment, wrapped in a blanket against my chest. The sun was dropping behind the trees, the grass wet from storm runoff. I sat with him on a bench under the eaves. He sniffed the air, blinked into the golden light, and then, without warning, he pushed his head tighter into the crook of my arm and let out a long, deep breath. That was the first time he fully relaxed. That was the first time I saw what he could be once the fear was gone. This German Shepherd puppy had been left in a pit, abandoned in silence, forced to survive with nothing but the will to keep breathing. But now he was here, wrapped in warmth, held by someone who wasn't going to walk away. And for the first time, he knew it. The next morning, Baxter stood on his own. It was wobbly, just a few seconds on unsteady legs. But it happened.
No prompting, no lifting.
He pushed himself up, sniffed at the blanket, and shifted his paws like he was testing whether the floor beneath him was real. I held my breath the whole time, afraid to move, afraid to even speak. He sat down again almost immediately, but I saw it in his face, pride, a spark, like something inside him had clicked into place. I can do this. The vet walked in just as he was adjusting his stance. She smiled. There he is. She gave him a full once-over, weight still low, hydration better, wounds healing slowly. No broken bones, no infections, just deep bruising and raw skin on the pads of his feet from days of scraping stone in a place no living thing should have been left. He's tougher than he looks, she said, gently rubbing behind his ears. He's tougher than most people I know, I said. That afternoon, we tried a short walk outside. I carried him most of the way, but once we reached the patch of grass behind the clinic, I set him down and waited. He didn't run, didn't play, but he stood, took 2 steps forward, then stopped and looked back at me like he was checking to see if I was still behind him. I'm not going anywhere, buddy, I said quietly. We stayed out there for 15 minutes, just the 2 of us. He sniffed the wind, watched the birds. When a car door slammed in the distance, he flinched hard, then slowly pressed his side into my leg. I didn't move, just stood there, hand on his back, letting him decide when to step away again. Inside, the staff had already started calling him by name. Baxter this, Baxter that. It fit him, not just the sound, the strength of it, solid, reliable, like he belonged somewhere now. They told me he could be released within a few days if his blood work stayed stable. But they also asked the question I hadn't fully answered yet. Where is he going to go? I hadn't thought that far ahead. Or maybe I had. Maybe that moment in the well when he looked at me and didn't look away had already decided everything. That night, I brought him another blanket, one from my house this time, one that still smelled like home. When I laid it down in his pen, he didn't hesitate. He climbed onto it slowly, circled twice, then curled up right in the center. He looked at me, eyes soft, and gave one single thump of his tail. Not much, just once, but it meant everything. This German Shepherd puppy, who had survived darkness, silence, and complete abandonment, had just told me in his own quiet way that he wasn't afraid anymore. He knew he was safe, and he wanted to stay. 2 days later, the nightmares started. They didn't call them that, of course. The vet used terms like trauma response and disrupted sleep behavior. But I knew what they were. I'd seen the same kind of trembling, the sudden flinches, the wide-eyed confusion in people, in fire survivors, in soldiers, and now in a 4-month-old German Shepherd puppy. It happened just after midnight. I'd taken him home earlier that day. The clinic signed him out with careful instructions, small meals, soft bedding, antibiotics twice daily. The moment I carried him through my front door, he looked around like he didn't believe it was real, like he was waiting for someone to pull it all away. He sniffed every corner of the living room before finally settling near the couch on the same blanket I'd brought him at the clinic. I stayed on the floor beside him, just like always. We both fell asleep, and then I woke to the sound of panic. Baxter's legs kicked wildly against the floor. He wasn't barking, it was worse. He was silent, his body seizing in quick jerks, his jaw clenched tight. His eyes were shut, but his whole body screamed. I reached for him gently but fast. Baxter, Baxter, it's okay. You're home. You're safe. He bolted upright with a gasp, and for a split second, he didn't know me. His eyes locked on mine, wide and distant, his breathing fast, ragged. I didn't move, didn't speak, just let him see me, let him come back. It took almost a minute before his breathing slowed. And then he did the same thing he had done in that recovery room. He leaned against me, pressed his small body into my side, and closed his eyes again. This time, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, listening to every breath, every shift, every twitch. In the morning, he was different. Not worse, not broken, but quieter, more alert. He followed me room to room, never more than a few feet away. He watched every movement like he was memorizing the escape routes. I sat down with my coffee and stared at him. Who did this to you, buddy? I whispered. What did they take from you before I found you? He didn't answer, of course, but his eyes did. There was something in them, Not fear, exactly, not anymore. It was caution, like he knew the world could go dark at any moment, and he had to be ready when it did. Later that day, I got a call from a local rescue group I'd reached out to earlier. They asked if I wanted to file a report, maybe check nearby shelters for similar dogs. I told them I didn't think Baxter came from anywhere that had records. Whoever left him had no interest in being found. That night, when we went outside for a short walk, he stopped near the old shed in the yard, stared at the dark entrance for a long time. Then he did something I didn't expect. He walked straight into it. I followed with a flashlight, heart pounding, unsure if he was about to panic again, but he didn't. He sniffed every corner, stepped over old tools and boxes, and finally sat down near the back wall. I crouched beside him. "You're not afraid of the dark anymore, are you?" He looked up at me, and for the first time, he wagged his tail twice. That was when I realized Baxter wasn't running from what had happened. He was learning to own it. This German Shepherd puppy had been trapped in a well, abandoned, left in silence, buried in fear. But he wasn't broken. He was rebuilding, day by day, on his own terms. And I wasn't just witnessing it, I was part of it. The next morning, he led me to the well. I hadn't taken him back there since the rescue. I wasn't sure if he remembered where it was or if I wanted him to. But as we walked along the edge of the pasture behind the house, his steps more confident now, tail raised slightly instead of tucked, he suddenly stopped. He looked back at me, then took 3 more steps forward, nose to the ground. He moved slowly, deliberately, not sniffing for fun. This was something else. I followed, heart tightening with every step. And then I saw it, the rotted wood rim, the collapsed board still half buried in grass. The well, the place I had pulled him from. It looked smaller now in the daylight, but no less cruel. Baxter stood a few feet from it, frozen. His body didn't shake. His ears weren't pinned. He just stared at the hole. His breathing picked up, but he didn't back away. I crouched beside him. "You don't have to go any closer," I said. "You never have to see it again." But he did. He took one cautious step forward, then another, until he stood right at the edge. He didn't look down. He just sat, not trembling, not flinching, and looked out over the field, wind brushing through his fur. I sat beside him in the dirt, unsure what to say, unsure if I should say anything at all. The same wind that had rushed across that barn the day I found him was here again. Same place, same air. But everything else was different. "You came back," I whispered, "on your own." Baxter didn't move, and then slowly, he turned his head and leaned into my shoulder, not like before, not in panic or pain, but in peace. He laid the weight of his body against me and exhaled. That's when I knew he was letting go, not forgetting, never that, but choosing not to carry it alone anymore. I stayed with him there at the edge of that terrible place for nearly an hour. The sun rose higher, casting light into the well, exposing the stones, the scars, the claw marks still etched into the walls, and Baxter didn't look away. That night, I took the tag out of my pocket, the one from the clinic that still hadn't been clipped onto a collar. I knelt down, buckled it gently around his neck. Baxter, strong letters pressed into metal, permanent. He didn't resist, just licked my hand once, curled up on his blanket, and sighed. This German Shepherd puppy had gone back to the place that almost took his life and claimed it, not as a memory of pain, but as proof that he survived. And in doing that, he gave it back to me, too. He gave me hope. A week later, Baxter was running. Not far, not fast, but he was running across my backyard between the low trees and old fence line. His legs were still a little awkward from healing, but his body was full of purpose. Ears perked, tail up, tongue out, a real puppy. For the first time, it didn't feel like he was recovering. It felt like he was living. He'd started playing with the stuffed bear, the same one he used as a pillow at the clinic. Now it was dragged through the yard like some prized trophy. He'd pounce on it, toss it, then glance at me like he wanted me to chase him. Sometimes I did. At night, he'd curl up beside the couch, one paw always resting over my foot. It became his habit, not clingy, just connected. He didn't need to be touching me to feel safe anymore, but I think he liked the reassurance that I was still there. And I always was. People in town started to notice. The clinic staff followed his updates like proud aunts. Even Paul stopped by once with a bag of dog treats and stood in awe, watching Baxter trot across the grass. "This is the same dog from the well?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. Hard to believe, right? Paul just shook his head. He shouldn't have made it, but look at him now. We sat in silence for a while, just watching Baxter nose around the garden, tail wagging softly like he was humming to himself. I think he saved you, too, Paul said. I didn't argue, because the truth was, he did. Before Baxter, my life had shrunk down to errands and memories. I had retired too early, lost my rhythm. The house was too quiet. I kept telling myself I liked the solitude, but the truth was, I'd forgotten what it meant to feel needed. And then this little German Shepherd puppy showed up in a hole in the ground, abandoned, broken, but still breathing. He didn't just need rescue. He needed a reason to trust again. And maybe so did I. That night, after a long walk under the stars, I sat on the porch steps and watched Baxter lie in the grass, his head lifted toward the breeze. He looked so different now, not just healthier, but whole. His coat had grown thick again, the patches of lost fur replaced by soft, clean tan and black. His eyes were bright, curious. I called his name softly. He looked at me, and instead of coming over, he waited. He wanted me to come to him, so I did. I walked across the yard and sat beside him in the grass. He rested his head on my knee, just for a moment. No fear, no flinch, no darkness left behind his eyes. Just trust, just home. This German Shepherd puppy had gone through hell and climbed his way out, not alone, but with someone who believed in him. And now he belonged. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important non-profit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility, it's pet care. Baxter was thrown away, left to die in the dark. But he held on. He waited. And someone showed up. One act of compassion changed everything. There are so many like him, silent, forgotten, just waiting to be seen. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to walk away. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Because every view helps shine a light into someone else's darkness. Join our family. Be their voice. Be their hope.